What's up, YouTube? Capital G. Going to talk about Aaron Noel's Dino Rabbit deck that he won YCS Chicago with. First off, I think the reason why Dino Rabbit was so successful, why it took the most top spots by one in YCS Chicago, is I think so many people wrote the deck off, and so many people thought that if you simply maxed out effect veilers, you were going to stop the deck. Well, here's the problem with that. If the Dino Rabbit player goes first, they have more of a chance of drawing Rabbit than you have of drawing effect veiler, because they draw 6 cards, you have 5. And then if you don't have the effect veiler, well, then it's just business as usual. And now you have a card it goes back to kind of being mediocre against Dino Rabbit, because you basically just have the tour guide and now you have a second Rabbit, but they have either a Doka or a Lagia on the field. So you're not only going to take a -1, but chances are that card's going to go plus for them as well. So they have a huge advantage in the game state. Let's go over the deck list right quick. 3 copies of Rabbit, 3 copies of Tour Guide, 3 copies of Effect Veiler, 3 copies of Drat Guaiba, 3 copies of Kabuzaz, 3 copies of Sabersaurus, Sangan, and Gors. 3 copies of MST, 2 Forbidden Lance, 1 copy of Pot of Avarice, 1 copy of Storm, 1 Monster Born, Book of Moon, 1 copy of Dark Hole, Mind Control, and 1 copy of Smashing Ground. He's got the entire Solemn Brigade, 2 Warnings, 1 Judgment, 2 copies of Fiendish Chain, 1 copy of TT, 1 copy of Mirror Force, Bottomless Trap Hole, and 1 Tech Regeki Break. Well, I guess we'll start with Regeki Break, since that seems to be the most out-of-place card in the deck. I think Regeki Break is actually pretty solid, because as soon as you have Lagia basically on the field, you're basically playing a protect game where you're just protecting Lagia. Although Lagia offers more protection than a card like Stardust from inherent summons and things that would be bigger than it, like BLS and stuff like that, the longer the game state goes with you having a Lagia on board with the negate, the more in favor it is. And the basic way that you want to keep that game state is by having cards like Solemn Warning, Mirror Force, and Fiendish Chain to protect your Lagia. Regeki Break is just another good card like that, where not only can you stop, monster attacks and big monsters from being summoned or threatening your Lagia, making you waste your negate, but it can also pick off back row too. And a lot of times in this deck, you will draw cards that you don't need. Like, let's say you have a Drat Guaiba and you made your Lagia that way. Well, now if you draw that third Guaiba, it might not be, advantageous to have that card at the time, unless you have another Dino, which you can immediately summon afterwards to make another Dino. Sometimes you'll have a full field, but you'll have Gors in your hand. That's another card you can pitch. Same thing goes with Effect Veiler. So, even though this deck isn't something that it counts on its graveyard, paying that 1 card cost isn't devastating. If you can keep that Lagia on board, you can keep the control game, you can keep Lagia full circle protecting your cards. Another thing I found interesting is the fact that he ran 2 Forbidden Lances. Everybody and their mama was like, Lance is staple at 3 and this and that. And you know what? To conventional wisdom, I don't think that Lance is necessarily a staple at 3. Basically, the deck boils down to this. If you go Rabbit and your opponent doesn't have the Veiler, then it's business as usual. If your opponent does, they still have to be able to kill that Rabbit. And he has a whole entire arsenal dedicated to make sure you can't do that. With Book of Moon, Bottomless Trap Hole, Mirror Force, Regeki Break, Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment, stuff like that, where, it's like you have to get through this, you have to get through my back rows to make sure that you can get to, my little Rabbit. Now, Smashing Ground may seem a little sketchy, but when Rabbit was first introduced, decks like Rabbit, one problem that Rabbit used to have was, your opponent could get something like a Master Hyperion on the field and you'd have a problem killing it because you couldn't attack over it. Now, I guess you could say that Agents have been replaced by Chaos Dragons, because the deck kind of runs similar. And if your opponent gets like a Red Eyes on the field or a Light Pulsar, it can kind of be a bitch to kill. So, this way you can make that Doka, you can play Smashing, and when Light Pulsar triggers, then bam, you can just negate it. Other interesting cards. Mind Control. Mind Control is in here just because, for the most part, the meta is basically 3s and 4s for all intents and purposes. When you play against something like Heroes, for the most part, all you're going to see is 4s. Within Sectors, you're going to see nothing but 3s. The Dino Rabbit Mirror Match, nothing but 3s. The only deck that you can't really always have something like a Mind Control live is probably Chaos Dragons, because their dragons are all, pretty big unusable levels, although you do have Effect Veiler instead of Max C being your staple max hand trap. So that also works in that category, in which I guess you could even take things like Light Pulsar and then tune with them. You know, so Mind Control isn't as out of place as it was maybe like a month ago, where most Dino Rabbit players, myself included, had completely ditched the deck or completely ditched Mind Control. One copy of Torrential Tribute. Torrential Tribute sometimes can feel like a double-edged sword in Dino Rabbit. Like, it feels like it's a great card if you don't have field presence or you're potentially losing the game. But when you've got Logia and you're playing the whole protect your board game, this is one of the worst cards to draw, because you're essentially saying, you know, either I've got to prematurely use my negate to make sure I get that +1 and then Torrential, or Torrential is just a card where it's not really advantageous for you to have it. You know what I mean? So I can understand why he only ran one copy. His side deck is pretty standard. Definitely like the whole Royal Decree, because heroes can be a straight pain in the ass for Dino Rabbit. That's one of their best matchups. And as Dino Rabbit got a hair weaker, the matchup for heroes just became a little easier. So let me know what you guys think of the deck. Hopefully people don't randomly start, you know, trying to net deck like Regeki Break. It was a solid tech in here, but I think that, you know, he probably knew what he was doing when he put the card in. So thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you guys next time.